Parshas Chayei Sara. We are going to be discussing, I'm going to go a little different type of approach today to the Parsha that I usually take. I'm more or less doing it verse by verse, and we're going to I'd like to go through the whole Parsha of Eliezer and Rivka with the Shidduch and with what we can learn from them. And there is a lot to learn. You know, it's interesting. There are 66 verses, 66 psukim in this Parsha dealing with just this whole story. As at first he goes to Avram and their whole thing meeting together, and then what happens, and then him telling over the same story to Besuel and Lavan. 66 verses of the Torah are spent on this episode. That's very interesting. In fact, I heard years ago from one of the Bali Musar, if you think about it, most of our Torah is a lot of stories. The whole Sefer Bereshis, the whole book of Genesis, is a bunch of stories. We find Shmos, most of it. There are halachas there, but it's mostly stories. Bamidbar is mostly, there are some things of reproof a little bit, mitzvahs between man and man, but Vayikra is mostly halacha. Bamidbar is, again, a lot of stories. Every parsha is like a different episode. The Jews complaining about this, that, and the other thing. And the book of Devarim is all reproach from Moshe Rabbeinu on his last day of life. Most of the Torah is either stories about great people or bad people, or teaching us about Musar, to teach us how important it is to spend time on this. Because something we forget very often, it says Derech Eretz Kadma Torah. We're supposed to believe that in order to acquire Torah, we first have to have proper character. And that's how important that the Torah spends so much energy, so to speak, in teaching us these things. They say, the Sifsei Chaim talks about it. He talks about accepting the Torah. And he says to accept the Torah, you have to be a vessel to accept it. I forgot who says this. I think maybe it's Rabbi, the Rav from the Rav from Ura, Rav Chaim Mintz, I believe, says this. He says if you're going to buy potatoes, you have to have a container to put them in. Or I have another analogy. If you're gonna catch a baseball, you have to have a big enough mitt to catch the ball. So too, to absorb Torah, to absorb the pure truth, the more a person is honest and has good character, he's willing to accept his failings, he's willing to deal with his emotions, he's willing to work on himself, he's willing to give in. All these things make it easier for us to acquire the truth and not be tainted by our own self-interest. And that's why it's such an important thing that we spend so much time on these type of episodes. So that's the idea, that we find the laws of Sukkah, barely a few verses, the laws of Tum and Tahara, of purity and impurity, which is a tremendous amount of time in the Mishnah and the Talmud. In the Torah, barely there, but Eliezer's whole discussion is 66 verses long to teach us how important it is for us to work on our character and how it's a springboard for everything that's in the Torah. Okay, so let's go a little bit. If a person has a chumash, they can use it. I also wanted to say that our class tonight is dedicated to Yosef ben Sarah Malka. This is Rivka Shapso's husband, who's been quite ill for close to a year, and he's in need of treatment. And we should all daven for him and keep him in mind. She really wants all of you. She really was the baseline of this year for so long, and hopefully we can pay her back. And then we at least, she wants people to daven by candlelighting, and she wants people to include him for Tehillim. So it's Yosef ben Sarah Malka to please keep in mind. Before Shalema. Now, so if we start from Parshas Vayera, the last week's Parsha, at the very end, after the Akedah, it says, "Vayhi achar hadvarim ha'elan." It was after this event. It says that Hashem, Avram Avinu, started looking for a wife for his son Yitzchak, and Rashi explains, and then it talks about the whole background of what's it called, of Rivka. The reason. It says Milcah had children for your brother Nahor. She gave birth, and it's connected. What's the connection? So Rashi tells us that after the Akedah, Avram says to himself, I was willing to give up everything for Hashem. I was willing to give up my child, my future progeny, everything for Hashem, all my ideals down the drain, nobody to continue. Now that my son has been restored to me, so to speak, I have to find him a shidduch immediately. That's how the importance that Torah places on having children and having families and getting married, because this is propagating the idea of Judaism to the world. We're continuing it by encouraging shidduchim and encouraging people to get married and have children. Find that very interesting. Rav Wolbe Zatzal brings down from the Chazon Ish that he says, contrary to most nations of the world who tend to send young unmarried men into the military, the Torah always wanted only married men to be in the military. That was the Torah's, they would say 20 and 50 and they would be married, that it was a condition. Why? Because imagine, God forbid, when a soldier dies today, his whole thing is gone. His whole progeny, there's nothing left of this person, soul. He has no one to follow after him. And instead, the Jewish way in the Torah was someone would be married first and then he would go off to battle, which is very, very interesting. So that's how important the stress that we place on people getting married and having children. Now, let's just go for a moment, because people always need to have reminders of how it worked out in the family. There were three brothers, Abraham, and he had two brothers. One was Nahor and one was Haran. Okay, each of them had children. Nahor, I believe, had many children, but Haran had three children that we know of, and that was Lot. The other one was Sarah, and the third one was Milcah. Those are the three children of Haran. So that means that Sarah was Avram's niece. Okay, he was her uncle. Now we find Haran. Who did Haran marry? Haran, I'm sorry, no, we don't know who Haran married, but Nahor, the other brother, Haran, by the way, was the one that when he saw Avram went into the fiery furnace, he decided to copy it. He says, you know what? If Avram goes into the fiery furnace, then I can also go into the fiery furnace. He was spared. It'll happen to me. So what happened was he followed the footsteps of his brother and he didn't live because he didn't really believe in it totally. So he was not spared going into the fiery furnace or caused him. That was Haran. And we said again, Haran had Lot and Sarah and Milcah. Now Milcah married his brother. She was the niece of Nahor. Nahor married his niece and Avram married his niece. Nahor had Besuel and Besuel gave birth to Rivka. So really, again, so Rivka and Yitzhak were really cousins. Besuel and Yitzhak were first cousins. So Rivka was his first cousin once removed. So that's how that all works out. I just wanted to, are curious to know how people are related to each other. So everyone married their niece, and then they each had so to speak, intermarried. Now, let's go into the whole thing of what happens. So in this week's parsha, if you want to follow in with the Chumash, here's your opportunity. Avram tells his Avdo. Now, Eved is it's a real special term to be called an Eved. We're going to expand upon it later. He calls, servants. In the world, they look at it as something very menial and demeaning, but not in the Torah. Moshe was an Eved Hashem. Eved is a big deal. He was Zakan Beso. He was the elder in his house, meaning he knew the most Torah of all of Avram's disciples was Eliezer. Hamoshel B'chol Asher Lo. He ruled over everything. In other words, he was in charge of Avram's bank account and Avram's keys, and he had the keys to all the cars and the keys to all the locks. He had anything of Avram's, he was in charge. Avram tells him, swear to me. All of a sudden, and it's a very strange way of swearing. He says, put your hand under my thigh. Like, what kind of, whoever heard of such an interesting way of swearing? Like today, people swear in the Bible, they swear in holy books. Like, why was he saying swear under my thigh? Like, what's the whole thing there? So there's several lessons we can learn from this whole idea. One lesson, first of all, wait, let me digress for a moment. Let me talk about Eliezer for a moment. Eliezer was Dola Omashka. He was called the Mesek Eliezer. He was It was Rashi Tevos is the initials of, he took exactly from his teacher and he gave it out. Like he didn't detract at all from Avram's teachings. He was exacting in it. Amazing thing here. And Eliezer had a daughter of marriageable age. He does not mention a word to Avram when we're going to have this whole shidduch thing go on. It's amazing that he had that attitude. Nassim Bachvogel, Zatzal, tells us that he says a beautiful chazal, and here it is in Bamidbar Rabbah. There's nothing as precious to Hashem as someone that's a messenger to do a mitzvah. But no say nafsho, and he gives his whole might in order that he should succeed in his mission. So this thing, a shliach mitzvah is even exempt from sukkah. He's exempt from, I think, from some rules of Shabbos. If you're a shliach to do a mitzvah, you're a mitzvah messenger, and that's what Eliezer was for Abraham. There's nothing as beloved to Hashem as a shliach mitzvah. Why? Says Rav Nassim, you probably know the reason why, because an eved, a servant, or a shliach, you don't feel the perks. Like when you're doing a mitzvah yourself, you say, okay, I'm about to take lulav and etrog and I'm going to do this mitzvah with it, or I'm doing this, I'm building this shul, or I'm doing this activity. You feel a little bit like you've contributed. When you're just a messenger, it's somebody else's thing. You're just his messenger. But that is taking the whole ego out of the equation. When you're a servant, it takes your whole ego out of the equation. There's nothing about you. You're just a messenger, and there's nothing that Hashem loves more than that. And he even calls himself, when he speaks to Besuel later in the Parsha, he says, Eved Avraham Anochi. He's proud of the title, to be a disciple of Avram, but not just a disciple, that I'm his total messenger. There's nothing as wonderful as that. He has no personal desires. We find that by Moshe, he was called an Eved Hashem. Moshe was the Eved, servant. And it's tremendously humble, right? That's what Moshe was. He was super humble. They say Moshe Rabbeinu had his vision of Hashem was called Aspaklaria Ha'meira. Unlike other prophets, Moshe had a clear, whatever this means, I don't know. I've never been in that category of a clear vision of Hashem. And other prophets were, first of all, they saw a hazy vision. And they also were compromised physically. They had to have a seizure, or they were sleeping when they had a vision. Whereas Moshe saw Hashem, he was wide awake and fully functional. Now, why did that happen? And Hashem was talking out of his throat. Why did Moshe have that unique experience? Because I heard explanations given. Moshe had no zich, as they say in Yiddish. He had no ego. He had no self. So, of course, the Torah is coming out of him. There's nothing there's nothing barring that interpretation. So Moshe could be clear in his presentation of Hashem, whereas other prophets had a little bit maybe of me involved, so it hazed up their vision. They can't see clearly. You can't see the truth when you have an agenda. And it's really astounding, the type of agenda that he had. Let's see if I can find this quickly. It says that, he brings down, I'm just going to paraphrase this. I saw this by Reb Chaim Mintz Shlita. This is a sefer that Rivka shops have wanted me to get the whole set. I had some of these. She wanted me to have the entire set. She finagled with Ura to get me the whole set of Eitz Chaim on the Torah. So I owed this to her. So the Malbim writes, in the beginning of Parshas Kedoshim, he brings down, the way Hashem set up the world was that man is supposed to be a miniature microcosm of the world. That and he's torn between his own desires and between what's right. So whenever man goes according to his nature, nature goes according to its nature. But if a man wants to overcome nature, if he overcomes his nature, then in turn he affects the worlds above, and the world can be manipulated by him, by his prayers, by whatever it is. But we have power over the whole world when we have power over ourselves. That's what he brings down from the Malbim. So this is really what Eliezer personified in his behavior, how he really was, totally humbled himself. He was a Canaanite. a Canaanite or whatever you call it in English, and he was Eved Kanani of Avram. He subjugated himself. They were cursed. They were not allowed to marry. I mean, they were not allowed. They were cursed by the Jewish people. Canaan was the son of Ham. He uncovered his Noach's. He was not modest the way he treated Noach, and because of it, Noach cursed them that they're going to be servants to everybody else. Now, we find though he gave in totally, decided to be the servant of Avram. He, in fact, to go to do this mission for Avram, he had to cross over the Medrash tells us he had to cross a sandstorm, says Rav Victor Miller. He crossed over a flooding river just to do what his master wanted him to do. That's what he had to accomplish. And he had a daughter, and he was the Rosh Hashiva of Abraham. And Abraham is making him swear not to take a Canaanite girl. And he does ask a little question. Will I, maybe if the girl doesn't want to come with me, what should I do? Like if I can't get a girl the way you want. So he was hoping Avram would maybe tell him maybe her daughter's okay, but no, instead Avram said, you are exempt from this mission. Avram had a plan B, says the Osnaim Torah. If he wouldn't have succeeded with his family back home, he would have gone with a daughter of Ishmael or a daughter of Lot. But this was his first desire. But Eliezer did not say anything outright to Abraham. He never complained, never said a peep. He was the epitome of a servant to his master. And in turn, he saw Avram was the gateway to Hashem. And he totally did not let his own agendas his own biases get in the way of all these transactions that are going to take place. Avram makes him swear that you're not going to take a daughter. Now, why did he make him swear on his thigh? So the answer given by many of the Meforshim is that there was not a Sefer Torah yet. Avram had a bris milah, that was his mitzvah object, so to speak. And Abraham did it under great suffering. So he's saying, this is the closest thing to a mitzvah object he had. So he's saying, I'm swearing in everything holy to Avram. Now, what did he make him swear? That he will not take three things. Two is overtly mentioned and one is implied. One, he will not take a Canaanite. Number two, he has to go to his family, get a girl from his family in Aram Naharaim, and not to get a girl from the midst of Canaan, where they were dwelling, in fact. That's an interesting fact. And he implied that the girl has to be brought to where Avram Avinu is, to Eretz Yisrael, which was Canaan at the time. Now, the idea was, why not Canaan? And there's a few reasons. One reason is there was a lot of immorality. They were known to be extremely immoral. And because they were so immoral, he had to avoid that at all costs. Also, even if it would be a girl that would be local, she had to, even if it was a girl from Aram Naharaim, from the family, they had to bring her to Avram because they still could be influenced. The girl could be influenced. Her parents, her relatives are all going to influence her. She had to be taken out of her environment and brought to Avram's environment. Very important. Otherwise, she could be, she wouldn't grow the way she should unless she's taken out of her environment and brought to the environment of Yitzchak. Now, why did they need a girl from the family? They needed a girl from the family because Avram's family did have very good traits. In fact, Terach, the father of Avram, before he died, did tshuva. He repented. No, he's an idolater, but he had good character. And, we find that was very important for this deal to take place. Now, the idea of swearing, that they had to swear that she's going to bring a daughter, only bring a girl from my family far away and bring her. Why did they have to swear? So one explanation is, Rabbi Yerucham Lubavitz tells us, Tzadikim maspi'im es yitzram. A tzaddik sometimes for his Yetzer Hara will mashpi'im, es yitzram. They will make their Yetzer Hara swear. Sometimes tzaddikim, under certain cases, made a neder to succeed. They wanted to make sure they really could fight with themselves, and the only way to do so was to make vows. Now, we are not encouraged to make vows on a general basis, but there is an idea if there's persons in a troubled state, persons in trouble, Chayei Sara, it's a time to make a neder sometimes. Now, I'm not a local Orthodox rabbi, so I can't fill you in on the details, but I know that we're supposed to sometimes, come to even make vows to, if, in a time of travail. Okay, so but what does it mean they mashpiyim es yitzrom, that they swear to fight their yetzer hara? What lesson can we learn from that? First of all, Rav Chaim Brisker once heard a story from a certain Hasidic Rebbe, and he approved of it, a certain vort. So even the Litvish, even the Hasidim all approve of the same story. This is what he heard. It doesn't say which Rebbe he heard it from, but he heard it from a certain Admor. And the story was like this, or the idea was like this. It says that some people, let's say their level of kashrut is they go to a restaurant and they see a sign outside that says this is approved. Now, this is in the days of the Chavetz Chaim, the days of Rav Chaim Brisker. This is not today where everything is very organized. But in the olden days, if somebody put kosher, and whatever, some people rely on the sign. Just the sign is enough. In fact, there is a thing to this. If we go to a strange city, it's very important to make sure we know which hechsher we're getting. Not all hechshers are the same. In Florida, I was told that there's loads of hechshers that are conservative hechshers. You have to be very, very careful. They told me in the COR, in fact, there's 1,000 hechshers in the world. Only 75 of 1,000 are legit and adequate for our purposes. So that's a big, just because it says kosher. I mean, I think we're all more sophisticated than that now. But in the olden days, place said kosher, that for some people it'd be enough. Some people with more fear of heaven would decide to ask a few religious people, can you eat here? Is this okay? Bigger than that would be, if you, really were still a little bit nervous, maybe would go to a yeshiva and ask a few scholars, would you eat at this place? And if you really had more your Shammai, you go to your Rav. Now today, I don't know if you have to go that far, but it's definitely, I advise people, if you're traveling, go to the COR, ask them, what are the local hechshers in the place you're going to go to, and make sure that that they're adequate, because it's not so simple. Anyways, the same thing here. He says that people, they all swear, like people write all these documents when it comes to monetary matters. And how careful are we? Equally careful with spiritual matters. So here is a spiritual matter. It shows the importance of a Jewish woman. Bringing a Jewish woman in the house is of such vital importance. He wanted him to swear to bring this certain kind of woman at the house. The midos were so important, the character traits and the fear of heaven and all the other things, that they wanted to make sure that they had the right candidate. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter tells us, there's a story about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter that's similar along these lines. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter one time was dressed up as a simple person. He ventured to some village somewhere. And when he was in this village, somebody approached him and he asked him, he saw Rabbi Yisrael Salanter look very religious. He could tell he looked saintly. There's something about his look, his face. Tzaddikim have a certain look. You can tell right away sometimes a person's righteous from his face. In any case, he looks at Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and he says, I bet to him the highest standard was, you must be a shaychet. He said, maybe you could check something for me. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said to him, I'm not a shaychet. And then Rabbi Yisrael Salanter asked the man, he said, could you lend me some money? And the man's got all nervous and he said, but we have to write a document. I need witnesses. I need this. I need that. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter says, look at your standards. When it comes time to your kashrus, then you're willing to just look at my face and ask me to slaughter something for you. When it comes time to lend money, already you're making everything documented and you want everything to be set out. So too, Abraham was not willing just, par for the course to just take any woman. He wanted Eliezer to swear that he's going to take from a proper family, that he's going to take a proper girl, that, he trusts Eliezer with everything. He didn't make him swear about his money or about anything else in the house. He made him swear only for these spiritual matters, and especially for a wife. It shows that a wife is not just something. I just heard today, somebody told me that Israel has abolished being a member of the Miss Universe pageant, because they said a woman is not a body or a face, which is beautiful. I'm very proud of the state of Israel that they are, finally that they're subscribing to that. That shows the holy places in Israel must have had some effect, and that we're not supposed to believe that, that a woman is just an object, For us, it's a big deal. So that's why they had to have this whole swearing in, so to speak. I think I mentioned to you last one. Okay, anyways, now, so I'm not saying that right now. Let's go to the next part. So he makes him swear that you're not going to take a knani. If you look now, if you're in your chumash, so he's absolved of his whole vow there. And if he doesn't bring somebody back. So he promised him, Eliezer promised him, and in Pasuk Yud, in the 10th verse, Eliezer took 10 camels of his master. And why does it mention the 10 camels of his master? Rav Wolbe brings down that Avram's camels were noteworthy, because they were muzzled. So look how careful our forefathers were with their financial dealings, that everything should be kosher in financial dealings, that so that they were all muzzled up. Now, so he took them and all the good of his master he took, and he went to Ram Naraim, to the city of Nahor, and he puts them, he sees these girls coming right then. As soon as he gets there, he prays, Pasuk Yud Beis, 12th verse. Rav Wolbe says there's two things that, well, he says one thing, but there really are two things a person has to do whenever they make an endeavor. First thing is to pray. He says in verse 12, he says, Hashem Elokei Adoni Abraham. He asks him, please do a chesed with my master. I'm standing here. And he makes this calculation. He says, we need, for this family, she needs to be a real giving type of person. And he says, the person who I'll ask for water from, and she offers not just me, but also the camels, this is the right girl for Yitzhak. That's the test. And then I'll know you did chesed with my master. So the first thing he does is to give the water. If you remember, we mentioned last week this story, which I'll just re-mention. For those of you who didn't get to hear it, Debbie Bullman sent me the story, and it would fit in with something I was saying last week in the morning. So it fits in right here too. It was very interesting. Several years ago in Israel, there was actually an action taken that they were about to commit to allowing abortion, legalizing abortion in Israel. And of course, as the Jewish people, the Rabbanim were all up in arms. They didn't know what to do. So they decided they have to plead with the justice minister and many others to please nullify this decree, so to speak, and not allow abortion in Israel, because here we're talking Jewish babies murdered, Anyways, they sent two representatives. One was Moshe Stern, I believe, who was a Rav Moshe or Michael Stern, who was a Rav in Beit Pagan at the time. So he had dealings like with secular people. It was like more of a mixed neighborhood in those days. And also they asked Rav Rafal Levine, the son of Rav Aryeh Levin, who was very into the secular world as well. He did a lot of chesed with a lot of secular people. They asked those two to represent them and go to speak to the justice minister at the time was Shmuel Tamir. And they wanted to speak to him about the whole, situation and plead with him to nullify this whole law. Anyways, so they approach him, but before they did so, they asked all the Rabbanim, please daven for us that our missions should be successful. And they did so. They davened for him. And when Rav Rafal Levine sat down, he said, we have a lot to discuss, but before we start, I have to tell you a story. And he turns to Shmuel Tamir and he tells him, years ago, a secular couple came to me with a dilemma. The husband was in medical school and he was working very hard, but they didn't have much money. And lo and behold, they got pregnant and they were really considering getting an abortion. And I pleaded with them. I talked to them. I told them, you're Jews. You can't so quickly run to get an abortion. So he told them all the facts and all the halachas and all the reasons why it was not good for them. And he convinced them. So they agreed to let the baby go to term and to raise this child, and what will be, will be. And what happened, this child was born several months later. They named him Shmuel. And he said, and he grew up to be a very prominent person, and she was very happy that she never had her abortion. And his name is Shmuel Tamir. So Mr. Tamir was like beside himself. He says, that story's not true. And Rav Rafal Levine says, call your mother. And in fact, he called his mother. He was saved by not having an abortion. So then he said, all right, I'm going to go to fight for this. I see the wisdom in not having abortions being legal. And they had so, they left, and they didn't even have to convince them. That was it. No, they didn't need any convincing. That was story did its trick. He went back to the Rabbanim and he told them our mission was successful, mission accomplished. And the Rabbanim asked him, they said, tell me, why did you know this story before you approached him? And he said, yes, it's been in the family. I know this story. He said, so why'd you ask us to daven? This is a slam dunk. For sure, tell this story to Shmuel Tamir. For sure, he's not going to legalize abortion. They said, well, because everything has to have tefillah before you do it. If you don't have davening, nothing succeeds. So he says, no matter how your case is so convincing, 100%, without davening, nothing works. So that was that story. And that's why Eliezer, at the beginning of his mission, used that an aspect of tefillah. But there's another thing. When in the prayer itself, he's saying that there's a girl that's going to come, and if she says this and that, that's what he proved for Yitzchak. Another element we have to have before we engage in any endeavors is we have to have bitachon. We have to have trust in Hashem. We find in Parshas Shmos, when Moshe Rabbeinu was going to go to Paro with Aaron to approach Paro and ask him to let their people go, he first, interestingly, went to the Jews. And he went and talked to them and gave them a whole speech. I'm going to go to Paro. And then at the end of the whole dialogue, it says, Vayamein ha'am, the people believed. And only then did he go to Paro. And if Simcha Zisel and Kelm asked the question, why did Moshe do it in that order? And I think Hashem as well asked him to do it in this order, because nothing succeeds without, you have to believe that this is going to work. This is going to work. And once you believe it, you have a potential of it succeeding. So these two things he employed, Eliezer, the bitachon and the tefillah, and then he got up and went. Now, as soon as he had this little prayer to Hashem, he wasn't even finished talking. It says in verse 15, Terem kilala daber, and then there's Rivka. So you'd think this is it. Okay, just get it over with, make the engagement. But no, we don't believe that you judge something in the Torah world. We don't believe you judge things from miracles. In fact, she came out and she happened to be related and the whole thing. And if you look at verse 15, it says, 16 rather, Hanara Tovas Mareh Ma'od. She's gorgeous, drop dead gorgeous, Basula. She's a virgin, Ve'ishlo Yida'ah. And not only was she a virgin, but she was so modest. She was dressed, I guess, so modestly. No man ever talked to her, basically. They could tell she was leave me alone. No one ever even tried anything with her, because she was so modest. We see that about her. Now, now it's interesting. We talk about Rivka being so beautiful. Often we find a lot of our matriarchs were drop dead gorgeous. And why are we told this? And the reason is sometimes it mentions their Tovas Marev, Yifas Toar, Yifas Toar usually it's about your midos, and Tovas Marev is beautiful. But why beauty here? I heard once from Rabbi Orlo, actually, who's the mashgiach of Torah Or. He once said he notices a converse relationship between beauty and character. The more beautiful a girl is, the less her character is, usually. It's a very big job. I read once years ago, there was a study done in the secular world. I happened to read this. I don't remember where I read it or where I saw it, but I read they took some kind of poll of all these high school graduates, and they found that the people that succeed most in life are those who are average students. In other words, the athletic student or the gorgeous student or the brainy student, they lived relying on those props during high school. Like how the brainy kid would always say to the whole class, I only got a 97 this time. Oh, too bad, or you have the beautiful girl, batting her eyelashes and everyone's surrounding her. Or it's not so much in frum schools, maybe with the boys, it's more with the athletics, but definitely in the secular schools, it's all into that. All those type of people. Okay, the athlete maybe and the beauty may end up being actors and actresses and movie stars and athletes and everything, maybe, but success as far as dealing with day to day, the other kids that have to struggle to make a friend, they have to struggle to get grades. They learn work ethic. which is so important in life. They learn social skills. You know, I just had an encounter with an ultrasound technician last week and 2 weeks, last week, I think. And I asked her, tell me, why is it in Toronto now there's a 9-hour wait in the emergency room? So she said, because people are coming in with all kinds of complaints. You have a person with a heart attack sitting next to Loelenu, sitting next to a person with a back problem. Like, she says, people are abusing the system. And I told her, well, according to what I've been hearing, there's a lot of people, shortage of doctors. There's a big shortage of doctors now. Some doctors only see people on Zoom. And then to see a doctor could be weeks. It's a whole process, you know. So I said, so people don't have anyone to go to. They don't have anyone for regular care. And she said, I said, so why is there a shortage of doctors? And she said, I'll tell you why. There's a shortage of healthcare workers. She says, because the young people are not replacing the people that retired. A lot of people retired during COVID. They said I'm about to retire, so I might as well leave now while the going is good still. And a lot of people left the system, or other people, you know, didn't want to get the shot or whatever it was that they left the system. And to replace them, the kids today, they said, she said, it used to be in my day, it was a noble profession to be in the healthcare system. And she says, now people say they want the easy money and they'd rather work remotely. And a healthcare worker cannot work remotely for the most part. They don't even want to go into it, which is very interesting. And I think that's the negative side of technology, because kids are so into like immediate gratification from technology. And also in technology, I'm throwing in all my soapbox criticisms here. And also there's all these, that they're banning guns, but at the same time, they're not banning video games. We're showing people killing in a horrible way, killing another person. And the kids are getting used to that. And they're not looking at people as much. People are their eyes are buried in their phones. They're not picking up on social cues. They're not dealing with other people. They're not whatever. So like the whole world is it's a real shame what we're seeing out there today. And it's seeping into our community too, believe it or not. In any case, that's my soapbox moment. So thank you for allowing me. But in any case, back to Eliezer and Rivka. So when she was Tovas Mar'eh, usually a woman that's really knockout, drop dead gorgeous is not sitting and working on her mitos. She can just glide along, at least for some of her life, just all her admirers, and just worried that she's got the right Gucci shoes and she's fine. But instead, so our matriarchs, to be able to still know what life is about and still focus on the important things when they could have easily gone another path is remarkable. So that's why her looks are mentioned in the verse. Now, so we hear about her tznius. That's still also a prerequisite for a good thing, and we don't want immoral people. We're learning all this from Avram Avinu. So interesting. So now when she goes to the well, but interesting, the verse 16. Vatera the Aina, she goes down to the well or the spring. But Tamalei Kadavatao, she fills her jug and picks it up. We're told, the Ramban learns from this, it doesn't talk about drawing water. She doesn't lower the jug. She doesn't lower it, because we learned that the water rose up to greet Rivka. Miracle of miracles. Here she comes. Eliezer's watching this thing. He just makes this condition with Hashem, and lo and behold, the water comes to greet her. And later on, we're going to see that she actually does draw water when it comes to the camels. But for the first encounter, she's just drawing water like that. So he runs to meet her because he sees, when there's an opportunity for a mitzvah, you don't lose it. You may never get it again. So he runs to meet her and he says, please give me a little bit of water from your pitcher. Now that itself is a test, because here's this able-bodied guy saying, to this young girl, can you give me a drink? Like, why doesn't most people say, get it yourself. Right. Go get it yourself. You're a big guy. You're not a baby. Go get your own drink. But that's the test. Sometimes for chesed, are we willing to give to people that really,
that's the second one.
In some ways,
he has it, yeah.
fend for themselves.
Okay, it's right under Beryl Weisswasser, Rabbi Steinhardt. Okay. All right, I'll call him directly.
I think we have to mute people. We're not muted
Thank
here somehow. Any case, so now I have to qualify this. There are cases that says if somebody's going to take advantage of you, you're not mechuyev to do chesed when you're going to be taken advantage of. That far, you're not obligated to go with chesed to the point where somebody's going to take advantage. So that has to be ask your local rabbi if it gets to that point. But sometimes there are people, it looks like, you're having a Shabbos guest, this person could get up and help a little bit or whatever, and they don't. So that's the test of chesed, that this was her test at least. Now, Listen, she answered him more than what he expected in this test. She said, drink my master. And she doesn't mention the camels yet. And she lowers it and she feeds as she starts serving him this water. And she later does that with the camels. The question is asked by, let me just see who this is, Oznaim Torah. He says, why is it now all of a sudden she's got to work? Before it was the waters were rising to greet her, and now it says she lowers her jug. Because he says sometimes when we start doing a mitzvah, Hashem starts cranking it up and making it more difficult for us. All of a sudden, things aren't so easy like they were before. And this is the challenge. This is the challenge. Are we going to do it even when things start getting harder and harder as we're trying to do something noble? Then, Hashem sometimes really cranks it up for us. Because why does Hashem crank it up? Easy. Lefum Sarah Agra. When Hashem sees we're doing the right thing, he makes it a little harder so we get even more reward. A lot of Rabbanim are always screaming about Pesach hotels that, for some people, they're very important. Like the person that really can't manage, that's what it's for. Aaron Kotler went to Pesach hotels when he was older with his wife. I don't think it was like the Ritz, but he went to some Pesach hotel, or some woman that really can't cope. But we have to realize every drop of effort is a mitzvah. We get to have things that less work, that's what, as I said, today's the philosophy of our generation. You don't have to work. You don't have to even go to work anymore. Everything's being done remotely. There's some, side effects, and that could be people don't see the value in effort, where we value the effort because that really was what counts. Now, so he runs to meet her, and she does a little bit of hurrying herself, but hurrying is only supposed to be reserved for mitzvahs. Hurrying is not supposed to be for regular life. Rav Wolbe tells us in Mir, where he learned, as a bacher, when he was there with Rabbi Yerucham Levavitz and all these saintly individuals, he says one time a bacher ran into the yeshiva, the base medrash, and everyone closed their gemaras and left because they knew there must be a fire if somebody's running. When we start running and moving, we can't think as well. We're so taken by the moment. You're not supposed to run. A yid, the Bali Musar are very big on this. A yid does not run. I once heard the story from Rabbi Friedler. He should rest in peace. Such a special person. Rabbi Friedler was a Talmud, a prime disciple of Rav Dessler. Once Rav Dessler came to Washington Heights, New York, and they were both going to get on a train to go to some philanthropist's home to do some collecting for Rav Dessler. So Rabbi Friedler, they went to the platform, and the platform upstairs, and they were descending the stairs, and all of a sudden Rabbi Friedler hears the train's coming. So he starts hurrying down the stairs to catch the train, and Rav Dessler says, we don't run. We don't run. And they in fact missed the train because of that. I don't know whether they missed the donations. I don't know the end of the story, but Rav Dessler says, we don't run. Now for mitzvah, we have to run to make it on time. For mincha, running means if you're going to miss a mitzvah, then you should run for a mitzvah. You're allowed to run on Shabbos even for a mitzvah. But I guess to that extent, for money, even though it is a mitzvah that they're collecting for yeshiva or whatever it was, to that extent, they don't run. Person rushes and runs, we start feeling we're in control. We forget what this world is about. When it comes to mitzvah, that's really the only thing that is in our control. So that's when we're supposed to run. And when it's something other than that, it should be an unusual occurrence. We have to have our minds always about us. Then that way we keep our priorities straight. So now, then after she tells him drink, the reason why she doesn't mention the camels initially is because she felt if she mentions the camels, he will hesitate in his drinking. He'll drink up quickly because he knows she's got this big job ahead of her. In fact, there were 140 gallons they calculate that she fed the camels. And she was about 3 years old, which is incredible. Anyways, so then as soon as he finished drinking his fill, she said, I'll also give your camels. So she really thought this all up until they finished drinking. Now, camel finishes drinking. That's pretty incredible. And then she ran and she kept giving all the camels. And he can't believe it. Like right away, she appears and she did the whole thing. She passed the test. And then when they finished drinking, he immediately gives her engagement presents. Immediately, he doesn't want to wait. God forbid. It says with somebody, you have a potential shidduch. Shema yaktimenu acher, another person could take the place. So instead, he immediately wants to finish this up right now. So he gives her 2 bracelets that's supposed to represent the 2 luchos, and the weigh 10 shekel of silver, which is like the 10 commandments, to hint that it's not enough chesed. You should also have Torah in your new home that you're going to establish. And that's when he brought her in. Now, another thing is Torah mentions that the reason why she didn't speak, if she didn't mention the camels, is it says ein masichin b'seuda. You're not really supposed to talk when you're eating. And it doesn't just mean while you're eating. It means, like I heard that, I'm not on this Matrega at all, but Rav Nissim Karelitz, that's all, when he would eat a Suda, nobody would talk the entire meal. We just sit there in utter silence, lest someone come to talking when they're eating. Like, that's already being very strict about it, but she didn't want him to have to talk while he was drinking. So she waited till he totally finished drinking to mention the camel situation. Now, the Beis Halevi mentions something incredible she did as well. In case of germs, I didn't mention this yet, so I'll mention it now. Right after he finishes drinking, she takes the remaining water and pours it into a trough for the camels. She did this thinking, if she spills the water on the ground, it may be insulting to Eliezer. To Eliezer. She didn't want to insult him. So instead, she pours it right after he finished into the trough, and the camels will drink it in case there's problems with the water. And she had him drink first. One of them, of Forshim, and I don't remember who, I didn't write this down who. I saw it, I think, in Talei Oros. I think he mentions it. It's, they say an interesting fact, you're supposed to feed, if you have a pet, you're supposed to feed your pets before yourself every day, because they're helpless, they depend on you. So how could she have given the camels after him? So the answer is, who says this? The Elio Rab, I think, mentions that, well, first of all, the Sefer Hasidim says you have to feed your animals before yourself, but you don't have to give them to drink before yourself. A human to drink takes precedence over an animal, because I guess you could feel faint if you haven't drunk anything. But they say more than that. Someone disagreed with his logic and said that actually, as far as a guest, if you have a question between your pet and a guest, your guest comes before your pet. We have to get our priorities straight. When it comes to myself, that's one thing. When it comes to my guest, a human being takes precedence over an animal when it comes to feeding a guest. Okay. All right, now let's go further. So then he said, like, after he gives her all the things, he says, who are you? He doesn't even know who she is yet. Why did he do this? Because Eliezer was so afraid his agenda that he really wanted his daughter to marry Avram's son. So he just immediately did it. He didn't want to have any agenda. He wanted to just do his mission. So immediately gave the presents before he even asked her, who are you? I wouldn't recommend that to too many Shalchanim today. Just, we're not on that level, but he just wanted to show that he had no biases whatsoever. He says, is there a place for us to stay? And she says, she says her background. And then she says, we also have all, things for the camels. And he says in verse 26, he bowed down. And we learned from this that when you hear good news, something is good for you, you should thank Hashem. That's what Eliezer showed that idea. Now she first goes, he first thanks Hashem, and he said, "Thank Hashem that never left my house of Abraham, and he gave me a place." And she runs and tells her mother what's going on. She tells her mother because it's not proper to tell all these things without your mother's permission. You're having a guest, and also the whole idea of the engagement. She doesn't do it without her. She doesn't bring him into the house until she gets her mother's permission for it. Now, when Lavan has the total opposite of Rivka, he sees the bracelets and the jewelry, and he says, "There's money here. There's good money." He runs to get the guest like that. He's all after the money. And he says, Panisi Habayis, we cleaned the house. What does that mean? We've taken out all the idols. The Alter from the Vardik says, look at his agenda. that he's willing to sacrifice his whole belief system for the sake of money. He's even getting rid of his own gods for the sake of money. That's how far he goes. Okay, now, what ends up happening afterwards, okay, what ends up happening afterwards is that when he tells over the whole story again, he tells them, he realizes his own bias, because when he retells the story to Besuel and tells him that I spoke to my master Abram and he said, Ulai lo sobeh Isha, maybe this woman won't want to come with me. And in the Chumash, in this place, it says without a vav, to teach us, he was thinking Eli, not Ulai, maybe the woman will be for me. I mean, maybe the woman will be mine. It'll be my daughter. From me, it's going to come the shidduch for Abraham. So he recognized his own bias because the Torah puts it here missing above, and in the beginning it doesn't miss above. Anyways, they put up the whole family, and when he tells them the whole story, they immediately start saying that Me'Hashem yatzah davar, from Hashem this comes. This is not normal. This is a miracle. We learn from her. Here says Ravolba that more than anything else, we see personal divine providence when it comes to shidduchim. Miracles happen with shidduchim more than anything else in life, and even Lavan and Besuel recognize this. And in fact, Besuel was like reluctant to send her so quickly, and he died the next morning. He never made it to the wedding. You know, at the wedding, we say the bracha that Lavan gave Rivka is the bracha that we give every kala before the chuppah. The father gives the bracha of Lavan to show that Lavan really, if it wouldn't be for his biases, he could have developed into a special person, but he never worked on himself. He wasn't aware of his agendas. He didn't want to pay attention to his agendas. And when you notice what you have to work on and you're aware of them, you think before you act, and you're aware that you want to do things for the right purpose, like an Eved does, then you get somewhere. In fact, they say that Eliezer, after this whole incident, was freed by Abraham. Before he was his Eved Kanani, and now he allowed him his freedom after he came back doing his mission faithfully. Now, in Pasuk Samech, we're talking about verse 60. Oh, they try to delay it, but no, Eliezer says, no, we can't wait. We have to do this immediately, because they know when there's something good, you don't delay it, because the more you delay something, things you can lose your chance. Now, so she gets up and she goes on the camel to go meet Yitzchak. Yitzchak was he was having a sicha. It says V'hu yoshev be'eretz hanegev, and he was going lasuach basadeh, to talk in the field. He initiated mincha, Yitzchak, and lasuach means that his way of davening was he talked to Hashem, like conversations. And we learn from the Hauda that that's a way to approach tefillah, that we should be conversing with the Almighty. And when all of a sudden he looks up and he sees this woman on a camel, and it says, "Vatipol mi al hagamal," she fell off the camel. Now, why did she fall off? Does that mean she didn't know how to ride? Like, what was the deal? So it said, a lot of the Meforshim tell us that she didn't want to look aristocratic, says Rav Hirsch. She didn't want to look aristocratic, and you're coming there with all these people accompanying you on this donkey, on this camel, and you're looking so fantastic. She instead felt humble. She wanted to humble herself. She didn't want to look so haughty-taughty. So she instead fell off the camel. And it says, "Batist kas," and she was covered. What she did was put the veil over her face, as they did in ancient times. Why does it? She was covered. She obviously covered herself. Nobody else covered her. The reason it's said that way, she was so used to being modest that it was like natural. It was like someone else did it. It was so natural to her to cover herself as soon as this happened. So, so she asked, "Who is this person?" And he said, "This is, that's when she covered herself, and she saw that it was Yitzchak." So Eliezer told Yitzchak everything. He brought her to his tent, to the tent of Sarah, his mother. Sarah had three things above her tent at all times, three things going on in her tent: the dough that never ended, kind of thing. There was a cloud over her tent, and there was also candles that never went extinguished for a whole week. That represented the three mitzvahs that women have: the taking challah, that she was going to merit for her children, the lighting candles, and family purity was the cloud, that it was the purity that hovered over their humble abode. So as soon as Sarah passed away, that went away. But when Rivka came back, well, he first brought her to the tent, meaning he taught her all the halachas of whatever. And because she had to rid herself, even though she was good character and everything, she had to learn the whole Abraham family traits here. So in all the mitzvahs and everything, so he taught her first. And then it says, and she became his wife. And then it said, and he loved her. And Rav Hirsch says this is contrary to the way the world looks at things, that first people are madly in love before they get married. And then Rav Victor Miller says it very bluntly, says, your wife goes one time and uses the bathroom and already she's gone down a notch in your eyes. She's not this femme fatale anymore. She's a human being, But we're supposed to look at it like, says Rav Hirsch, that a woman is supposed to grow. The love grows as after marriage more than it was before marriage, if people properly try to help each other and try to serve each other. The Sefer Eitz Chaim brings down, he mentions that the reason why she was a comfort, it says she comforted him after his mother's passing. Parents are the assistants for their children. They bring them their spirit, they encourage them, they nurture them, they raise them, they teach them everything about Torah. And when he doesn't have his parents, he needs his wife. So we all know wives in some degree are like a mother sometimes to their husbands, especially if a man gets sick. We know who the real mother is at that time. Women getting sick is much different than a man getting sick. It's usually, anyway, so let them try labor one day. I don't think they could do it. But so the woman is supposed to, encourage her husband. And that took the place. He felt bereft when he lost his mother, and she took his place. So we've learned some interesting lessons here, and that's why 66 verses on this whole story of Eliezer and Rivka to teach us not to have an agenda, to rid ourselves of agendas. And like we said, like Rav Victor Miller, he didn't even mention once to Abraham about his daughter. He totally was the Eved Neman, and there's nothing so beloved to Hashem as someone that rids himself of his agenda and humility. And then we see the Chesed. Chesed, says Rav Dessler, is the key to Yirah Shamayim, because he says, what is the key of Emunah? What does belief in God mean? You can see outside yourself. You look at a tree and you say, there must be plan and purpose to this tree. You see that from not looking at yourself all the time, not everything being in your own shadow. By doing chesed, besides emulating the Creator and being able to recognize his actions, we are also looking outside of yourself. The more we look outside of ourselves, the more we can see God than just davening in a sitter without seeing God. So chesed really is the key, and that's why that was the key thing for the wife of Yitzchak. And really, I know the Stipler used to say, for any wife, the main thing to look for is chesed in the wife. Also, the way they ran and running to do a mitzvah, don't lose the mitzvah because it can be lost. Even a shidduch can be lost. If a person doesn't grab it, tomorrow is a different day, and this time is never going to reappear. So a person should grab the time. And I thank you so much for listening. I thank Bina with her huge burden now of a schedule to take this upon herself to be the person that is